Have you always wanted to make your fills feel less boring and more improvised and creative? Well, incorporating your kick drum into your fills is a great way to start doing this if you want to be able to play with that confident, joyful fearlessness that sets the greatest drummers apart from the rest. But I get it, it's tough to pull off fills like this smoothly so that you don't train wreck and feel like a less than musician as a result. So today we're solving all of this. I'm giving you 3 steps to work through to get you playing these linear fills between your hands and your right foot that will even help you with Bonham triplets. This is pretty cool. You can do this. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're here hanging out with me today. I help hobby drummers and a lot of semi-pro players become the drummers that others want to play with by teaching you the core drumming skills that save you time in the practice room. And hey, how would you like to know the quickest possible way to master the drums? See, the thing is, there are a million things you could be practicing, a million things the internet will tell you to be practicing on the drums, but you ain't got time for that because the truth is you don't have to practice everything in order to get really good at the drums. I want to give you a shortcut. I want to give you a cheat sheet and help you cut to the chase, focus your practicing. So I want you to grab my totally free PDF e-guide. It's called Know What to Practice, the 3-part daily practice routine for getting you faster results in less time, having more productive practicing because you know exactly here are the exercises to practice, here are the concepts to focus on. This is going to get you results in less time. Total no-brainer. Go grab it, make some progress on the drums today. All right, on with today's lesson. Something I want you to know today is that you can avoid that fear of mistakes, that fear of making mistakes, which actually leads to a fear of being boring that keeps you from really having that confident, joyful freedom that you see in the best drummers out there, that kind of freedom that allows you to play whatever you hear in your head. It's interesting because a lot of times we get hung up on fills. We want to be creative with our fills, but we're afraid of making mistakes. We're afraid of train wrecking. We're afraid of just completely messing up a fill, and so it frustrates us. There's a lot of fear associated with this, so we end up playing it safe sometimes, which might be a good thing sometimes depending on the song, but we need to be able to step into that creative improvisation when the music calls for it. And we don't want to just be stuck being boring, because so many times that's what we worry the most about. We end up feeling like we're boring, and we don't want to just sound like everybody else. We want to have our own unique voice. So I want you to know that you can do this. You are capable of this. We're going to dive in today and dig into these 3 steps. And what's cool is that the first step, honestly, if you just take what we cover in step 1 and you go practice this a bunch over the next few weeks and months, you're gonna make a lot of progress. You're gonna see a lot of results, even if you don't even touch steps 2 and 3 because of just how deep this goes here in the first step. So let's dive in. What we wanna do here in step 1 is coordinate your feet the same way you coordinated your hands. So think back to the basics. What were the first few things you might have practiced with your hands? Or maybe you're totally new to the drums right now. What are those basics that you're hearing everybody say you need to practice on your practice pad? Probably things like singles, doubles, maybe paradiddles. In my opinion, here at the Non-Glamorous Drummer, these are really the 3 big rudiments we talk about. A lot of the others you can ignore for a while, but if you practice your singles, doubles, and paradiddles, you can go really far with those. And those are things that we want to practice a lot with our hands on our pads so that we're developing that left brain, right brain coordination and getting our hands working smoothly with each other. And paradiddles really help a lot with that because paradiddles are kind of funky stickings that really test our hand-to-hand coordination. So if those patterns work so well for our hands, why not use those with our feet or with a right foot to hand relationship? We can definitely build a lot of hand-foot, kick, snare, freedom, and coordination there by practicing those patterns. So here's the first thing we want to do. Remember, we're thinking in the context of fills. So there are a lot of different ways and variations we could practice this stuff. But what we're going to start by doing is this is up to you too, you can either do flams on the snare or put right stick on floor tom, left stick on the snare. And we're just going to go back and forth. Just like that, super simple. This might be super easy. But start pushing the tempo a little bit more. Because you can think of these as 16th notes. 1 E and 2 E and And basically all we're doing here are singles back and forth between the hands and the feet. It's kind of like our hands are the right and our foot is the left. If you want to think of it that way. Right, left, hands, foot, hands, foot, hands, foot. This is the absolute most fundamental core way to make sure you've got your hands working in time with your foot. Make sure you don't have any galloping like If you've got any kind of sloppiness going on like that, just go really, really slow. Go very slow. And you can even do this one hand at a time. Like you might realize, okay, left hand is not behaving over here. Maybe you've got a bad, weak hand that needs some work. Maybe you just need to sit here and go. And just practice that, or maybe just right hand. And then go back to both. However slow you need to go, and then gradually work that tempo up. I think a great goal tempo for this is actually like 55 to 60. If you can get this going as 16th notes at 60, you're in great shape. I think that's a good first target tempo. Here's what it sounds like. And then from there we can go into doubles. And at this point we're going so slow, it's not like you have to think of this as like crazy fast doubles. Like if we're playing, the idea here is not like a fast double stroke roll between the snare and the kick, though you can work up to that. We're really just thinking of this as hand, hand, foot, foot, hand, hand, foot, foot. And in doing this, you are going to gradually build up some foot chops. We're not going deep into foot technique right here today, but practicing these things slowly are going to help you build that speed over time. So all we want to do is. Now here you can also, of course, change up the sticking. You could also do. And you'll find a lot of practical application in fills for right, left, kick, kick, right, left, kick, kick. So this is totally worth practicing both ways. So doing hands, hands, foot, foot, hands, hands, foot, foot, as well as right, left, foot, foot. So of course, start off really slow. And if anything is slightly sloppy, remember that you cannot fix sloppiness by, barreling through it and trying to get faster and faster and hoping it's just going to fix itself. That never works. Maybe you get lucky and maybe it kind of seems like it's working, but then if you slow the tempo back down, you'll find that it's still sloppy and you've actually not gone anywhere. So be patient with it and go as slow as you need to get it smooth. Even if you're sitting here going, you might feel like a just total beginner, but that is not a bad thing. So go really slow, get it super smooth. And there's no rule saying you can't get creative and move around the kit a little bit, because that can create a really cool fill pattern, just literally that right there, doing the doubles. So as usual, a great goal tempo is 60. 50 and 55, those are good goals too. Those are great milestones on the way. So I recommend when you're practicing along to your metronome, start off probably 50. When you're going slower than that, it just feels so slow with the metronome that it can almost be frustrating. I'll rarely tell you to not practice to a metronome, but it's okay to sit here and just really slow play it, no metronome. Then once you can get it to 16ths at 50 or 8th notes at 100, whichever way of thinking you prefer, then start locking that in with the metronome, working your way up to 16ths at 60. So here's 16ths at 60. And lastly, our number 3 sticking, paradiddles. So paradiddles are a lot of fun. It gets pretty interesting here because it's really testing your ability to carefully think about what your foot's doing versus what your hands are doing. But again, do it very slow. Start with the foot. So do foot, hand, foot, foot, hand, foot, hand, hand. And if there's any trouble going on here, make sure you've mastered the paradiddle pattern just with your hands first. If you're not able to sit here and go right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, and pretty much know that like the back of your hand, don't go to doing it with your foot just yet, because that's going to frustrate you. So as long as you've got that down with your hands, you're feeling confident with that sticking, go ahead and jump over to using the kick too. So just like with the doubles, there are a couple different sticking options. You can sit here and just go. But the other one I like to do is, so those last 2 hand notes are right, left. You could do everything else just with the left hand, boom, bum, boom, 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 right, left, boom, bum, boom. And of course, you could also do this just with your right hand. Get as much versatility out of this as you can and sit here and practice. There's no rule saying you got to do one thing or the other. Try to do all those things. Come up with different ways to move it around the kit, because here's another tip. As you're moving around the kit, your ear is learning to hear different sounds while your hands are doing the same thing. A lot of times that's the disconnect between taking things we practice on a pad and translating it to the full kit. What happens is our hands learn something, but then we move it around the kit. Suddenly we're hitting a different surface, so it feels a little bit different. But the big thing is that it sounds a lot different. And so our ear is like, whoa, what's going on? Is that the same thing? Are we still playing this right? Because now it sounds totally different than it did on the pad. And a lot of times that's actually indication that when we were practicing on the pad, we weren't really listening all that well. We were just playing from our hands and going on autopilot. When you take that autopilot kind of pad playing and take that to the kit, suddenly things get a little crazy because your ear is like, wait a second, now I've got to actually pay attention to how things sound. So keep that in mind. You can move around the kit, get creative with this, and that's actually going to help you learn the pattern more solidly, because suddenly you're hearing different sounds. It's giving you something extra to think about, and it's pushing your coordination a little bit more. So here's how the paradiddles might go at 60 beats a minute. Now that last little thing I played kind of alludes to where we're going with this. So at this point, if you've followed with me, if you're tracking with me here through step one, this is a great accomplishment. Like if you can play all of this, even if it's slow, keep in mind that a lot of times when we play these types of fills, mixing in the kick drum, it doesn't have to be fast. A lot of times the coolest, most interesting sounding fills aren't really that fast, but because they mix some toms and snare in with the kick, they're super interesting. And so you've now already built up that ability. Now you just got to start using it and figure out, how can I apply this? How can I take this to the next level? And so if you've been tracking with me, you're doing great. Keep going, because I hope you've proved to yourself already you can do this. You can definitely learn these and get really comfortable with these and start feeling more creative. You don't have to be boring. You don't have to be boring. You can be creative, and you don't have to fear those mistakes. You don't have to fear train wrecks, because when you practice this stuff really slow with the metronome, you get it so solidly imprinted into your brain, into your ear, that your chances of messing it up really decrease. A lot of times I think the reason we fear mistakes in fills is because we blast into fills we haven't really practiced, or we blast into fills that maybe we've only practiced fast, and so we're not actually fully aware of what we're playing. We're kind of just going into something and I hope this works out, I hope I finish it at the right time. But if you practice these things really slowly, your ear is aware of exactly what you're playing, your hands and your feet are aware of exactly what you're playing, and suddenly, here's the cool thing, it becomes intentional. And when something becomes intentional, you're not going to mess it up, because you know what you're doing. You've thought it through, you're hearing it, you're making sure you're playing exactly what you intend to play. And when you log tons of repetition and you practice this stuff over and over again, that builds confidence, and that leads to the freedom that I want you to have. So I hope you're encouraged by that. I hope you're empowered by that, because you can do this, you can master this stuff. So that was just step one. We can go a little further with this. And honestly, if you want to park right here and just practice everything we've covered up to this point, that's totally fine. But I don't know where you're at. Maybe the step one was not too difficult. You're feeling good about that. Let's move on. So what we want to do here in step two is use hand-foot threes, as I like to call them, to create unique melodic patterns in your fills. And that's kind of what I alluded to with that little lick I played there at the end of the paradiddle example. Where I just started shaking it up and changing the sticking between foot and hand. So what we can do with threes, we could either play hand, hand, foot, hand, hand, foot, hand, hand, foot, or we could play foot, foot, hand, foot, foot, hand, foot, foot, hand. And if we just take those two things right there and then combine that with the paradiddles, the doubles, the singles, that basically means that we can play any random thing back and forth. We could play something like at that point, we can start making up fills that are actually kind of interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about the practical application of why this is so cool. But I want you to start off with these threes. Now, I say threes because these aren't necessarily triplets. We're not talking about triplets like We're not talking about a jazz context, a shuffle context, a blues context necessarily. You might just play groupings of 3 in a 4/4 like standard rock kind of feel, where maybe you're playing those are actually eighth notes. I just played eighth notes, but they were in groupings of 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and a boom, boom, bop. So a lot of times that's the context of these threes. That's why I call them threes and not triplets. Anyways, so practice these hand, hand, foot, or foot, foot, hands, foot, foot, hands. And just like with the other sticking patterns, work these up to 16ths at 60. Now, you might use them at an even slower tempo in a song. I don't know what the song is that you've got in mind, so they're not always going to be fast, and that's totally fine. But practice them really slow. Gradually work these up to 16ths at 60 or 8ths at 120, whichever you prefer. As you're playing though, something interesting that'll happen is your brain will want to reset where the beat is. Like if you're trying to hear the quarter note, like the way I counted it off there with the foot, you'll notice it gets weird sometimes. It gets weird when you're listening. And so if you find that it's hard to lock that in with the metronome, it's okay. It's not the end of the world if that's difficult. But I do want to challenge you to do that. See if you can keep those threes going with the metronome, even though a different part of that 3-note grouping is going to line up with the beat each time. Just like how when you start, and so in a way it's like something that we refer to as metric modulation a lot. And so it can be a little bit challenging because of that, but it's definitely a listening challenge. And actually as a bonus, if you can practice these with your left foot playing quarter notes, and do like that, so you're actually feeling and counting that quarter note while you're playing the groupings of 3, that's going to push your coordination so much. And that's going to be really challenging for sure. But I just want to throw that at you for you more intermediate, advanced drummers out there. Give that a try. That can be a great way to continue pushing yourself and really challenging yourself in this area. So the practical application here, I've kind of already showed it to you a little bit, but what's so cool, a lot of times the most interesting fills, they have like a melody to them. There's like a rhythm in the fill that kind of feels like a melody versus just that would be a basic singles fill that doesn't really have a particular rhythm or melody coming through. But if we play a fill that's kind of like this, like that kind of fill, bam, bam, boom, 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 crash. And that's the rhythm, that's the melody, and then we're filling the space with the kick, which makes it more interesting. And so that's the approach you can take a lot of times, where you think of a rhythm, you think of a melody, and you play that on the drums with your hands, and you fill in the space with your kick. And if you've practiced everything leading up to now, you've done your singles back and forth, you've done your doubles, you've done your paradiddles, and you've done those threes, which actually, by the way, those threes occur within a paradiddle. So you already got practice doing the threes if you did the paradiddles. This is all linked together. Then you're able to do all sorts of really cool stuff here and sit here and go. So really, to take this to the next level at this point, what I want you to do is practice making things up, even going really slow like that. Because if you don't practice applying this, if you don't practice like actively using this, if you don't practice improvising it, that improvisation might not naturally just pop into your playing. A lot of times you have to make yourself create. You have to make yourself improvise with something you just learned, and that's going to help you get so much better at it and feel so much more confident at it. And so that's the next step I want you to do here. Now let's get into step 3, our final step. There's one more really cool thing we can do here, and that is throw the kick into typical singles fills. So I mentioned the basic and so on, kind of singles fill that we've all heard in a lot of classic songs and just a simple go-to fill a lot of times. But what can shake that one up and make it more interesting is maybe replacing every fourth note with the kick and playing something like, or something like, that's actually a pattern that shows up a lot of times. So that can be a common one, as well as sixes. So we could call what I just played fours, by the way, because those were groupings of four, where the kick is every fourth note. We could also do sixes, where the kick is on every sixth note, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In both of these examples, the kick is replacing a left-hand note. So we're just giving the left hand a break for a second, and the kick is happening between those right-hand notes. Right hand is constant, kick is filling in the space there. So this might sound like, it gets interesting when you move it around the kit and when you mix that in with the fours. Suddenly there's a lot of different options for what you can play, and actually can get pretty interesting if you're playing a groove and you want to throw in a fill that mixes all that together. And so literally just things like that can be so cool, where you're mixing in little bits and pieces from all of those things, where you've got some of those fours, you've got some of those sixes where there's a little bit of kick action, then you've got some threes, which are kind of like the paradiddles, and then you've got your doubles and your singles. So you can see how practical all of this becomes when you start stringing them together, and you can start really creating music with these. But the key is that you have to actively apply this. You have to actively apply this and sit here and make things up. Even if it's slow, sit here and go. Like, go however slow you have to go to be able to play smoothly like that while randomly inserting the kick. And you'll find that the more you do it slowly, the smoother and cleaner it gets when you're going fast. Because as you're doing this, you're also going to be building up foot strength and technique. You're going to be focusing on moving around the kit and hitting everything nice and strong. And so a lot of other skills are going to be built in the process. There's a past lesson here on the channel about making your fills big and bombastic, about basically creating these rock fills that feel like something from a Foo Fighters song or a Killer song. And so for more on that from this past lesson, go check that out. I'll put that link in the description below. So those were our 3 big steps. And if that is if that is the focus of your practicing over the next few months, you're going to make so much coordination progress. You're going to start feeling so much more confident and free in your ability to play linear, creative style fills. It's going to help open your ears up. It's going to help you with moving around the kit. Practice all of this methodically, slowly, with a focus on sound quality and smoothness, and you're going to go a long way. You're going to do great. I hope you know that. You can definitely do this. But hey, there's one more thing. I mentioned back in the introduction Bonham triplets. And actually what's cool is that if you've practiced all of these things, remember how I talked about how they all build off of one another. Once you've done your paradiddles, you can do the threes. Once you've done the threes, well, you can also do the Bonham triplets, because instead of doing you could do right, left kick, or left, right kick, left, right kick. My favorite way to play these is like this. That's my personal variation of Bonham triplets. I don't think he did that exact sticking. You could either start with the kick and do it that way. You could go, or kick right, left. So many different ways you could do this. You could start it on different parts of the beat. You could stick it different ways. I like sticking it right, kick, left, and letting my right hand be the beat, because I find that has the most practical application in a lot of these kinds of fill patterns, where I could sit here and I could play. where it's kind of like the right hand is my ears focused. That's kind of the anchor. Of course, if you're actually doing it in a triplet context, it's going to be a lot faster, and it might be. In that case, if you're playing, then the right hand literally is the beat, but it all depends on the context. So what's really cool is that you now have the ability to do this because of everything else you've worked on up to this point. So like with everything else, practice very slowly. Your preferred sticking, I recommend you start with the right kick left. Just practice doing that really slow. Again, the focus is on smoothness. We don't want any kind of galloping. We want it to be totally smooth until you can execute this in the midst of something else. So here's just a couple of examples of fills where I'll very specifically use these Bonham triplet patterns, whether they're actually triplets and really fast, or maybe they're slower and it's more of a doom doom ba doom doom boom ga. And so those are just a couple of ways you can use them. The context of fast triplets, great way to impress your friends once you start getting those up to speed. They don't always have a lot of practical application in fills. Sometimes there's the right moment when they fit really well, but it's not something you want to do multiple times on a gig. But the slower version, just being able to do that gives you a lot of syncopation freedom on the toms. Total side note, if you're a drummer playing in church, so you're playing a lot of modern worship music, there's so many syncopated tom patterns showing up in that style of music. And if you can play very slow Bonham triplets, not as triplets, but as groupings of three like this, in the midst of like a slow quarter note like that, that gives you so much ability when it comes to things like there's a lot of slow syncopation that we find in a lot of modern worship music, and so if you're playing in church, that's probably something you've encountered. And if you're trying to play more syncopated fills that aren't necessarily fast and intricate, this might be your path to get there. So I want you to keep that in mind too. That's why this is all so worth practicing, because of that core reason. It gives you that freedom to play whatever creative improvised fills you want to, so you don't have to worry about being boring and you don't have to fear mistakes. That's a big deal. So I really hope this helps you get there. Hey, I want you to leave a comment below. Tell me, which of these patterns have you practiced before or used in fills before? Like, were any of these familiar to you? Have you actually been using these? Maybe you didn't realize it. You hadn't thought about what you were actually doing, or maybe you have intentionally used some patterns like this. These kinds of things are floating all over the internet. I'm one of many drummers that'll teach these kinds of things. And also, which of these are you going to start using right now? Like, which of these was your favorite? Which of these patterns do you know, all right, I can go to the practice room right now and start working this and start using it? Leave a comment below. Let's get a discussion going. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I've enjoyed this lesson. I love anything about creative fills, and I really want you becoming creative and having freedom in your fill creation using the kick drum, incorporating your kick into fills. So I really hope this helps you out, empowers you to be the drummer you know you are capable of being and that you're made to be. So thanks for watching. I hope you have a great week. Stay non-glamorous. I'll see you on the next lesson.